Okay, here we are again. Welcome back, everybody. This is the We Quit Booze Brothers, which is a podcast where we try to have honest, no fluff conversations about our various experiences of quitting alcohol. And with me, as always, is my brother Matt. Hello, Matt.
Hello, Mark. Yep, here we are back again with this new side-by-side format, which I think is better. I watched it back on YouTube and we had some comments, so thank you so much for those. But yeah, I think it looks a little bit more professional, albeit we could do better. But no, it's great. So hopefully you guys out there like it too.
Yeah, I think the system for recording and the quality is a lot better. I'm not sure about the two blokes talking, but apart from that, it's a bit of an uplift. Yeah, I think the quality is better. So good, awesome. All right. Well, look, the conversation that we wanted to have this evening, because it's Monday evening, in case anybody's interested here in the UK. Feeling quite autumnal out there as well, but hence the jumper. But anyway, sweater, whatever you call it, from wherever you're from. But the conversation that we wanted to have, it came out of, as these things often do, it sort of came out of nowhere. I was listening to a podcast in the week, and the guy that was doing the interview was a guy called Louis Theroux, who's quite popular in the UK. He does a bunch of sort of kind of mockumentaries and sort of weird documentaries. He's quite a funny guy. But he was also interviewing another British comedian, guy called Steve Coogan, who again is pretty popular in the UK. He's very well known here in the UK. He's quite famous for doing a character called Alan Partridge, which is a sort of a washed up C-level, C-grade celebrity, and he does a very sort of funny, ironic portrayal of that guy. He's also appeared in movies, and he's done quite a few movies actually. In fact, there's a movie where he I don't know if it's Laurel or Hardy that he plays in a movie about Laurel and Hardy. It's the skinny one, whoever that is. Everybody will be shouting at the screens now. And he's actually brilliant in it. He portrays him super well. I think it's Stan Laurel, isn't it? So anyway, that's sort of by the by, but check out the movie because it's actually good and he's brilliant in it. And anyway, they were doing the interview, and it turned out that Steve Coogan had quite a big alcohol and cocaine habit about 10 years ago, which I think I sort of knew, but I wasn't that conscious of it. But he talked about it, and he is now sober, and he's been sober for about the same length of time that I have, and he's about the same age as I am as well. So I guess I kind of, locked in on a few parallels there with we're a similar age. Yes, he's a celebrity. I'm not a celebrity, but apart from that, and
say that. But
yeah, well, apart from this, obviously, a massive
our
subscription.
250 listeners.
Yeah, exactly. But. So Louis Theroux asked him about it, and there was a few things that he mentioned. The first thing he said, I've realised now that I can't do the nights that I used to do and also have a morning. He says, I can't have a good night and a good morning. I think I'd extend that actually to a good day. So he said, so I've sort of choose the good mornings now. If I, the point being that if I have a big night on the whatever, it really wipes me out for the next day. But the thing that really struck me, and we have touched on this before, but I just thought it was worth bringing up again, and something that anybody tuning into this will resonate with. He talked about how when you drink, you just unavoidably and inherently become dishonest. And I think there are degrees to that dishonesty, but I don't think you can drink. Anybody listening to this, anybody that's considering quitting alcohol because it's got to a point where they're fed up with it, it fosters dishonesty. It leads to dishonesty. It can be minor, like you could, for example, if you're feeling absolutely terrible, you might say you feel fine, even though you do feel...
How much did you drink last night?
Yeah, you're not honest about how much you drink. How many of us have been in a doctor's surgery and filled out one of those forms, and it asks you how many units of alcohol do you consume? And if you're anything like me, you weren't honest about that. I sort of skipped along and said, well, it's probably only 15 or 20, when in fact it's probably 15 or 20 units in a one sitting.
One thing that I think I've said this before, but I'll say it again. I actually believe that people with alcohol problems, drug problems, would make the best spies. Like, honestly, I was talking to someone the other day, and the amount of deviousness and dishonesty that just comes naturally or coupled with having a problem around alcohol and or drugs, it means that you naturally want to keep that kind of hidden. You want to be dishonest to yourself, you want to be dishonest to other people, and the lies do follow. I joked earlier, I said, how much did you drink last night? But it does start there. How many of us went to a bar, a pub, whatever it might be, and you get home and it's a bit late, you're half an hour late, maybe an hour, and your wife goes, God blimey, where were you? What have you been doing? How much have you had to drink? And you're like, honestly, I just had a couple. Double it. And then there's the whole thing about lying to yourself, and I think it goes in many forms. It comes in many forms, and again, we are repetitive, and I know that on this podcast, on this YouTube channel. But I talk about the children thing. The putting an iPad in your children's hands, or putting them to bed early and reading the story as quickly as possible. The reality is you are lying to yourself, because there is only one reason you do those things, and that is so that you can go downstairs and have a drink. And that is dishonesty. That is being devious. Look at work. People will turn up and be hungover, and they may sort of joke about it, whereas actually, what are you doing turning up to work, having gone to bed at 3 o'clock in the morning, and you're pretty much unfit for work. So I think it bridges work and personal. I think the alcohol problem person, the alcoholic, whatever you want to call it, you just become devious. You lie about things. I would lie about where I'd been, and it wasn't necessarily that I'd been doing bad things, but it was that I'd been and had a drink, or I wanted to go somewhere and I'd used excuses. I remember saying that, my colleagues after work, they always like to go for a drink, so they always invite me and stuff like that. And it wasn't always like that, and so the lies were there, and it really does.
I think there's layers as well. There's layers of dishonesty. I think there's the really big ones where you just you're covering up your behaviour, and that it's pernicious and it's damaging to your soul. It's very difficult to get away with that over the long term. Like I said, it affects your self-esteem. It has a pernicious impact on just how you feel about yourself. And I think getting into the habit of being dishonest is really, really dangerous. And that definitely happens when you drink. The other one I think is just for anybody who maybe has quit and has had those moments of temptation. That again, I think is an example of where you can quite easily start lying to yourself. The stories that you come up with in your head are, look, you only get one life. What am I doing not having a drink? Come on, I need to relax. I go, this is ridiculous. I should have a drink. I'm a grown up. There's, who can tell me that I'm, not allowed to have a drink? All those sorts of stories that can creep in and they're dangerous. And I think the only real answer I feel like I can, or counter to that, is if you've ever had that temptation but resisted and held firm, and then I just want to remind you of how you felt when you woke up the next morning, like how utterly relieved and how light you felt compared to how you would have felt if you'd have caved in. You know, I would very often just sort of lie to myself about how much I would drink or how much I could drink. And it's another thing that Steve Coogan said, interestingly, he said, you know, when you drink and you go out, you have to make decisions. You've got to decide, am I going to have one drink tonight? Am I going to have 4 drinks? Am I just going to say, screw it, I'm going to drink a load? When you don't drink, you don't have to make any of those decisions. You know, that sort of that weight is taken away from you. So the pressure and the stress of living a life which is inherently dishonest is removed when you don't drink. And I think, going back to my point about if you ever have had that moment of weakness, of temptation, and you did get through it and you did get to the next day, you need to celebrate that. You need to really, remind yourself of how incredible that is, because the brain is a bugger. You know, it can trick you. It can come up with all these stories as to why continuing to drink alcohol is a good thing, why you're missing out if you don't drink. And as we've talked about on this podcast so many times, the absolute opposite is true. We've proven that, and we've proven it to ourselves. So I feel like I paused there because I always do a bit too much talking.
No, but you're right. You know, it all goes away when you stop. And actually, what's mad is you realise that through honesty, you tend to get the answers that you want anyway. Stupid example, but I like watches. I like all watches. I like cheap watches. Could be a Casio. It could be an Oris, or all different brands. I just I like horology and I like watches. And sometimes I'll buy a new watch, and it might not be anything expensive. It doesn't need to be an expensive hobby. It really doesn't. But there's still part of me which is linked to my old self, which is, how am I going to get this past the wife? And then the me now is like, well, you just tell her. You just talk to her about it. Just say, hey, I'm thinking of buying, this watch. I really, really like it. It's in the price range I was thinking. I've been talking about it. What do you think? Have a conversation about it. Whereas before it would have been, how am I gonna can I get it delivered somewhere else? Can I come up with some story about it? And yet the reality is, when you do lay it out on the table, when you do just talk honestly and openly, often she goes, that's a really good idea. I really like it. Why not? Sometimes she might actually be the voice of reason, and you're glad. And she was like, oh, well, why don't you just wait? Because, you've been talking about that other one. And if you buy that, then you're just really putting the money away on that one that you could save for the other one. And then you're like, yeah, do you know what? You're actually right on that. So, yeah, I think it's a whole
It's
new
exactly
world.
that.
The other one, sorry, just to stop, because I think I'm going to pass the baton over to you here, actually, is the other one that we talked about before, and I think is so important, is health. Lying about your health, which you touched on earlier when going to the doctors. And you and I both had pains and odd things.
Yeah, you do. And look, I think, just to sort of close out, really, you've touched on it as well. I think when you drink, because there is almost a requirement to be inherently dishonest. You can't drink like we did and be like, how are you? Yeah, fine. I just downed a bottle of scotch last night and I'm feeling absolutely terrible. I can barely speak. I'm still hammered. My heart is thumping out of my chest. I'm still sweating. You can probably see. You're not going to say any of that. You're going to say, I'm fine, thanks, and chew through the day. So there's, so what happens is it becomes internalized. You sort of become habitually inclined towards a dishonest path. When you quit drinking, that all goes away, and you realize you can be honest about everything. You can just be honest, because we also talk about this term of a return to self. As the time goes by, You return to the person you were before you became a drinker. And as you get older, with a bit of wisdom, you can start to piece together not just being the person that you are, but also becoming the person that you really want to be, and being honest about how you feel. Anyway, it was an interesting thought. It was an interesting, again, when you don't drink, you tend to sort of, when someone says they quit drinking, your ears prick up. And the last thing I'll say is that it did sort of make me smile, is he said that if he's driving along in the car these days and it's quite late and he sees a police car behind him, he immediately thinks, oh God, and I'm going to get pulled over. And then suddenly goes, oh no, hang on a minute, I don't drink anymore. So I'm absolutely fine. And, I've definitely had that experience, I wish I could say that I never drank and drive. I don't think I drank a lot, but look, who amongst us who has been a drinker hasn't, and those. So yeah, so that all goes away. It's a load off your shoulders. It makes such a big difference to sort of free yourself from that pressure. And that's sort of it really. That was my rather long-winded point.
No, it's a great way to end, and I think I'm not going to go into this, but broken promises. That's another one that goes away. How many times did we stand there in the pub? You've had a few drinks. You start talking about something you're clearly not going to do. It's not going to happen. You're making it up almost on the spot. And now I hear that the other way around, and you're kind of nodding.
It's
and,
annoying.
Yeah, and it's something that just completely goes away, and that's a pretty cool thing too.
Maybe that's a conversation for another session. I think one of the big things is it allows you to follow through. I can follow through now. If I say I'm going to do something, I can follow through because there's nothing to get in the way. There's nothing to stop me. There's nothing to distract me. I don't hammer it at the weekends and spend most of the week recovering. So it's all linked and it's all great. So cool. Okay, look, we'll leave it there for now. Thanks as always for listening. Do help us out with comments, subscribe, share this episode if you know someone who you think might benefit from it. But unless there's anything else from you, Matt.
No, just if you're a new listener, I do have a book. It's called Man Gets Sober, so check it out. A lot more stories, a lot more anecdotes. Talk about quite a few things in detail. So if you're interested, you can pick it up on Amazon and take a read.
It's a good book. Brilliant. Okay, well, as I always say, never quit quitting. It's a goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from me.
It's goodbye from him. Till the next time. Cheers. Bye for now.